Oh, I think I'll have a sip of water too. It's really hot here. What's the weather like there?
It's rainy and wet and very cool right now. We're
Yeah,
transit. It's almost springtime here, so finally we're just getting out of the winter months and the drudgery of that.
yeah,
But it's been a little warmer, but all the snow is melting and it's creating all kind of problems, and it's a mess. It's been wet. It's been raining all day here,
yeah,
so it's very damp.
yeah. We're very humid here. We're coming into autumn, but we here in Queensland, we really only have two seasons, summer and a mild winter. So so it's still very humid, and there's even talk of cyclones forming off the coast further up the top of Queensland at some stage. We've had rain on and off the last few days, but then there's also been lots of activities in the skies. So I think, yeah, like most of us know, a lot of it's orchestrated and engineered. Because
Oh,
we
no
had a
doubt.
cyclone last year in March and it was unheard of before that. For years and years, we always had our cyclone weather was usually sort of late December into January, maybe into Feb, but yeah, very rarely would we have cyclones past Feb. But last year we had a strange cyclone that hung off the coast for nearly a week and went up and down before finally hitting, doing landfall, and then it just sort of fizzled out. But there was all the hype, and of course everyone was panic buying, and yeah, which they're starting to do now with petrol because we've been told here in Australia that we've only got, what was it, 26 days, I think, of fuel supplies. I went to
Wow.
Costco the other day and the lineup was like nearly a mile long. Oh, it was incredible. I thought, oh,
It's
Costco's a sure bet because it's an American company, so surely we'll have some fuel. But yeah, I don't know. But again, it's probably just all the media hype and
yeah,
propaganda, just the fear mongering. Yeah.
the political theater of the mind, get people out there in a panic type
Yep.
state, and that way they could use it as an excuse to gouge prices and everything else too. You know how that goes.
Exactly. Yeah. They've already
We've
started
we've
hiking
seen a lot
prices.
of
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. All right. Well, I'll get going. I'll start the introduction. Okay, hi everybody. This is Amanda of Seven Ravenwolf, and this is episode 17 of Caravan of Consciousness. And today, my guest is Wayne McCroy of Alchemical Tech Revolution. Wayne is a philosopher, a researcher, an author, and so yeah, I'd like to welcome you today, Wayne, to the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me on. Always a pleasure to get out there and reach new audiences. I'm a little bit honored. I don't know if I deserve the distinction of philosopher. That's a title that's kind of lofty in my viewpoint.
Oh, okay. Well, you do touch on a lot of philosophical materials, so and you're well read and well researched. So yeah, and I think I first came across you through Crow 777 team, Rose, Jason, and Crow, and of course I've also seen you on Jason's Secrets of Saturn podcast as well in recent years. So. But first of all, before we get started, if you'd like to just tell people firstly where they can find your material and your books and things.
All right. I can be found at my website, www.alchemicaltechrevolution.com. Everything's centralized there. I'm trying to steer everybody to the website for everything. It's much easier to have just one place to go. Now, up to this point, I've been kind of all over the place. Like I've been on Spotify and Rockfin and everywhere with, and you can still find my stuff there, and I still post there regularly, but I'm trying to centralize everything, make it a lot simpler. So now I actually have memberships available and stuff directly on my website for people if they're interested in signing up for that. with some extra perks for that kind of thing. But everything's there. You could find everything at the website. That's the best place to begin looking and delving into the thousands upon thousands of hours of work that I've done at this point. So there's a lot to talk about. It's a strange world we're living in for sure.
Yes, absolutely. And also, don't forget you've got your YouTube channel, so people can go there, and that's Alchemical Tech Revolution on YouTube. So you've got 24 books. So I'm just going to read off a few of the titles just so people know what to look for. But The Enoch Polarity and the End of Time, The Autism Epidemic, Transhumanism's Dirty Little Secret, The Demic of Pan, Breaking the Natural Order, Cybernetic Messiah, Building the Antichrist System, Autism, AI and the Singularity, Digitizing Human Consciousness, The Nightmare and the Midnight Rider, and The Red King, Alchemy and Witchcraft. And they're just a few of your 24 titles. So lots of stuff to unpack in there. But first of all, I want to go back to just so my audience can get to know you a little bit and how you got to where you are now with what you're doing with your research and everything. So when did you first sort of realize that the world wasn't as we have always been led to believe it is? Like, how did you go through your awakening process? And was it from childhood, or did you have something sort of happen later in life that sort of pointed you in the direction to start joining some dots?
Well, I've always been interested, even in my childhood, things like the paranormal and parapsychology and things like that have always interested me. And one of my key interests that I really was fascinated with was UFOs. So that's kind of where I started with all of this. But it wasn't until much later in my life, it was back in 2006, that a couple catalyzing events began and sent me really seeking down these different avenues of thought in finding a lot of these bits of information. And it always ties back to a couple of key places, and we'll get to that as we talk a little bit further here. But essentially, I'd always had an interest in the paranormal. Excuse me, got a little bit of a frog in my throat here. But I've always had this interest in like paranormal things like the nature of consciousness, UFOs, all of that stuff as a child. But I really kind of walked away from that for a good long time. And it wasn't until something had piqued my interest in 2006. At that time, I was actually driving over the mountain here. I was coming home from visiting my mother, and I had my oldest son with me at the time. And at the time, he was probably about 12 or 13. I'm trying to think. Yeah, about 13 years old. And we were coming up the mountain, and we came up to the top of the mountain. And at the top of the mountain, we saw this strange bit couple of lights in the sky, and they passed like almost directly over us. So at that time, I had a car with a power moonroof. So I pulled over to the side of the road and opened the moonroof, and we watched this thing slowly float right over the top of us. It was only about 30 feet above the treetops at the top of the mountain. It was a quiet night, nobody else on the road or anything, and we watched this thing sail overhead. And it was square shaped. It was a metallic craft. We could clearly tell it was metallic. It was square shaped. It was totally silent, and it couldn't have been moving more than maybe about 20 miles an hour. And there were four lights, white lights, one on each corner, and one big red light in the center. So we watched that, and we were both stunned and dazed, and we had never seen anything like that before. Now, I had seen some UFOs in the past in my childhood and stuff that kind of piqued my interest, but nothing like this. So this is what really sent me searching down these different conspiratorial topics and researching them. So we saw this, and my oldest son was with me, and probably nobody would have believed us if we were by ourselves about this whole thing. But that's certainly what I saw, and it really renewed my interest in the UFO topic. So that's where I really started researching and digging. And then it was a bunch of different synchronistic type events that occurred throughout the course of the next couple of years that really sent me digging deep into these various rabbit holes that always invariably lead to two places. And this is what I always tell people, and I sound like a broken record. whenever you start to research any of these, what they call conspiratorial type topics, whether it be UFOs, political corruption, anything of the sort, anything that would fall under that umbrella as of conspiracy, you will invariably come to two places. The first place you'll come is the occult. You will always find the occult in all of it. And if you trace it back to its roots in the occult, you could go all the way back as far as we could look as human beings, and you find the mystery schools and the various teachings of these old philosophical groups and groups from the past that these ideals have been brought forward through. And the other end of the spectrum, the other thing you will find, in addition to the occult, you will always find a little philosophy known as transhumanism as the culmination of those things you find in the occult, in the roots in the occult. And it all ties together, and it's a very vast web of synchronistically connected things. It's a tapestry of sorts, how all of this interacts, and it has to do with the nature of consciousness, has to do with all of these various topics. So I started really heavily researching these topics as a result of that event in 2006. It's been 20 years now. I've been really digging deep into a lot of these topics. It was always a kind of a passing interest in times before that, but that's when I really began to get serious about it, and I started looking at various things. And then a couple other synchronistic type events happened during the course of my life over the course of the next few years that really sent me looking in some other directions as well, which tie together with this. So one of those was my second oldest son. He had a reaction to a shot that he had at the time, and he wound up later developing autism. So this sent me searching down the biomedical field and all of these different avenues of thought relating to that. And it's just astounding the things you find when you really dig deeply and you're able to see the big picture, the overall picture, from a different outside perspective than what you're handed in the mainstream paradigm. So that's kind of what got me going. And now, as somebody that started out kind of doing this with no real direction, other synchronicities fell in place through the course of time. And I began really heavily researching this stuff, putting my ideas down. And I had really developed this sense of things about the world, knowing and understanding a lot of what's presented to us is lies and is miscommunicated and it's misconstrued and it's misappropriated to us. So I began really analyzing all of this stuff going on. And I had no outlet for this. In those times, you're talking probably, up until about 10 years ago, was a very lonely road walking and looking at this stuff. There weren't a lot of people who had any interest, first of all, or knew anything about it or would admit to knowing anything about it. So you couldn't talk to anybody about conspiracy topics at that point. So it was a very lonely road. So I began to vent and I was telling my wife some things. And one day she really got tired of it and she said, "You know what? You should write a book." and, and so that's what kind of set everything in motion for me. So I did. I began to write a book. I prayed about it and thought about it and meditated on it. And what wound up happening is I did start writing a book with no way forward, no audience, nothing of the sort, not knowing what I was doing, thinking it was going to be just a wasted effort. But I I heard the calling and I went ahead and I did so anyway, with no way forward. But that's the way God works. When there's no way forward, He opens doors for you that you didn't even know were there. So what had happened is during the course of this time, I got back in touch with an old friend just through chance, and that's Jason Lingren from the Secrets of Saturn channel. I hadn't talked to him in almost 30 years. I hadn't seen him since he graduated from high school. We were childhood friends, and this is one of the weirdest synchronicities I could find, and this is really something that confirmed for me that I'm on the right path here. I had no audience, I had no way forward, I had no outlet to really promote this book or have anybody even interested in looking at it. And then just through chance, through a mutual friend that we both had on Facebook, one day we encountered one another through this mutual friend's post. They posted something on there I forget what it was even about, but Jason had chimed in the comment section there, something about social engineering. And this friend of ours had no clue what he was talking about, but I knew immediately what he was talking about. So I chimed in on that post, and then he actually reached out to me and messaged me directly, and we started talking again. And we were both thrilled that we were both awake. And that's what he said. You're awake, he
Yeah.
said to me. That's the thing he said with an exclamation point. And he was excited about it, and I was excited too. So it turns out, and I had no idea at the time, turns out Jason was working with Crow 777, was co-hosting Crow 777 Radio. I had no clue. I didn't even know at that point Crow had his own podcast. I had heard him a couple of times on Greg Carlwood's Higher Chats, and that's it. But something about Crow always resonated with me. I always liked the way his cadence was and how he presented his information and maintained his direction towards things. So I found that fascinating. I thought, well, that's an interesting turn of events. So at any rate, Jason helped me get my foot in the door with that kind of stuff. And from there, now I have an international audience, and I'm been doing this for thousands upon thousands of hours now, podcasting and writing books and all of this stuff, and I've been able to turn it into my full-time job now. So it's something I enjoy doing, and it's something that I spend a lot of effort and time doing. So it's amazing how these synchronicities all fall in place and God opens doors for you where there was no way before. And that I'm confirmation of that. I'm just a regular dude, you know? I'm not somebody that's been through like years and years of college training or anything like that or specialized training. I'm self learned on all of this stuff. And it's really been something else. I've come a very long way with a lot of this, and
That's
it's
probably the
astounding.
best. Sorry to butt in, but that's probably the best way to be because usually if you have degrees or you've been to uni or you've studied through the mainstream avenues, you're more indoctrinated. So whereas you are like a blank slate and you're just soaking up all these books, all this information, you're able to discern and sort things out in your own mind and feel what resonates with you. So you probably are streets ahead of people that study these things in a mainstream setting.
Right? The academic setting's not for me.
Yep.
That's one thing. As far as my background and stuff goes, like, career wise and things like that, I've worked pretty much business. I have a college degree in hotel and restaurant management. I've worked in management for most of my adult life, working in the service industry, working at various restaurants at restaurant management and retail management and things like that. So, and I have a little bit of background in food science. So, other than that, I mean, like, none of this stuff was really anything I was qualified to speak about. But now I'm qualified because I've self qualified in that way.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. Well, I did study. I think I've told you before when we've been messaging back and forth. I went to a alternative school back in the mid to late 90s and into the early 2000s, and I studied esoteric psychology and astrology. And we studied the ancient or the ageless wisdom teachings, and we studied the books of Alice Bailey, Helena Blavatsky, Ledbetter, people like that. And at the time, I'd heard a little bit about the Masons, the Freemasons, but this school was actually affiliated with the Masons, and there was rituals that they used to do, not satanic rituals, by the way, people. So everybody just calm down. But we used to do rituals on astrology, like we do the Labors of Hercules, little productions and things like that. And it was all very ceremonial, magical type sort of things. And we learnt about the seven rays and things like that. A lot of it I've just, like put on the back burner. Um, but it really opened me up to occult and mystery schools and things like that. And so, what I want to ask about that is, do you feel that there's been infiltration, because the mystery schools, I believe, were probably originally set up because a lot of the mainstream masses, or just the general people, which would have probably been farmers and people like that, um, they were probably not of a level, and I'm not saying that these people are higher or lesser, because everyone's on a soul journey, and some people are kindergarten level, some people are university, but we all get there in the long run. But with the mystery schools, do you think originally they were set up um, to bring in initiates that were going to use the knowledge in the right way, but then somewhere along the lines they got infiltrated, the same as the Masons, I think, got infiltrated by darker forces. So therefore now people think that anything occult or esoteric is automatically dark, when it's actually not. There's a lot of truth and wisdom and spiritual truths in there, but you've just got to sort the wheat from the chaff. So, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah, certainly. What I have found, now this is the thing that really gets me, is when you go back to the origins of these mystery schools and mystery teachings, it's really not something that is evil. And a lot of people will equate, like you said, a lot of these occult fraternities and stuff as being evil. It's a mixed bag, really. What has happened is through the course of time, much of what the original intention behind all of it and the original teachings behind it has been inverted, and now it's the opposite of what the original intention was. The original intention inherent in mystery schools, here's the difference here. This is what I try to express to people and explain to people. The mysteries, in and of themselves, what this was, is this was an individuated form of worship of the Creator. That's what it was intended within the mysteries. Whereas religion is what you would call corporate worship or collective worship. And what has happened is all of it's been misconstrued one to the other. So it was something beautiful at one time. It's about your individual connection to God, okay? Your one-on-one relationship with God. And a lot of what has happened since that time is you've had people who emerged within these mystery schools who understood some esoteric secrets, understood some natural science secrets, things about how the operations of reality function. And they decided, I don't think this guy over here deserves to know this or that guy. So I'm going to keep this information to myself. And that gives me a type of advantage over them, gives me some power over them. Like I know some things about how the natural world works that they don't. So I'm going to use that information to give myself prominence in the society and culture. So that's largely what they did. They hid away many of these teachings of the old alchemical sciences and natural sciences, and they took this form of worship, this individuated type of connection back to God, and they perverted that into something that it was never intended to be. And they turned it into something that is self-seeking rather than seeking after God. And they took this notion of the mysteries and this connection to God, this one-on-one connection to God, that relationship, and that's the important thing, the relationship. And they tried to externalize that. And we see that even in some of the writings of like Alice Bailey, externalization of the hierarchy. It's the same kind of thing going on. So they took what was intended to be this individuated one-on-one connection from a person on their own individual unique spiritual path, their connection to God, and they tried to externalize this and turned it into a synthetic version of worship, and they created this outward expression that is religion. Now, this collective worship that is religion originally was also a beautiful thing, but it was kind of second fiddle to this individualized worship that occurred in the mysteries. But what they did is they flipped that around. And now it's the external factor, the outside veneer that they look at as the religious structure, and they turned it into a control structure. And that's a lot of what's happened. And they did so through keeping some of the secrets that they knew about natural sciences and stuff to themselves. And they became kind of this separate class, this priest class that ruled from behind the veil for ages untold here, and still does today. This is what's happened. They've established themselves into a position of prominence over others by keeping information from them and actually taking what the original intention was and inverting it and twisting it and turning it into a type of control structure for themselves. So they mislead people, and, and this is what's happened. And this is largely what's been brought forward into what you would call modern day occultism. It's all the inversion principle. And if you want the true definition of Satanism, it's the inversion principle. And that seems to be the thing that has caught hold today and has resonated today with people. Now, that's not to say everybody out there in many of these occult fraternities and stuff knowingly follows that and knows that it's evil and it's bad and it's been twisted and perverted. Many of them have good intentions and they get involved and don't realize what they've attached themselves to. So this becomes problematic. I take umbrage and issues with all of these different secret society groups today because what they've done is they've taken many of these concepts and they've misapplied them, misinterpreted them, and tried to turn them into this one size fits all thing. It's what I call synthetic initiation. And that's what all the secret societies do. The initiation process in nature is tailor made and unique for each individual. But what they've done is they've turned it into a one size fits all ceremonial rite wherein they oftentimes will apply some traumatic type event to try to trigger something in people to wake up their third eye. This is what they claim anyway. So this is what they do. So they use trauma in order to initiate people, and they use a one size fits all ceremony to do it. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work for everyone. And this is the whole point. I mean, so what they've done, in fact, is they've created this organization with this unifying ceremony, this initiation process, and it gives actually more sustenance to the organization than it does the individual. So what they've done is they've diverted the individual connection to God, the individual portion of spiritual growth, and they've turned it into a type of corporate spiritual growth that applies to the organization itself or the egregore of the organization. So I hope this makes sense. I'm sure this makes sense to you. I hope it makes sense to the listeners
Yes,
too.
it does, absolutely. And what came to mind then was um, the singularity that they're talking about now, like the transhumanism agenda and the powers that should not be's agenda, and they talk about the singularity. Um, and but the flip side of that is the universal one, that we are all one, we are all part of God, but they have kind of flipped it. Um, but there was something else. What else was there? There was so much in there. um, I had a few things to say then. I can't remember now. Um, no, it's gone. But the other thing I wanted to get you to elaborate on is, and I listened to your most recent interview that you had on Crow 777 and talking about the egregore. So for people that don't know what an egregore is or understand that concept, are you able to touch on that, please?
Yeah, essentially what this is when you go back and you look at the various teachings of the occult fraternities, there's some commonalities that you could find. This is something I've spent a number of years actually looking at and studying. I go through all the various different systems that are present, whether it be the Hermetic systems, the Rosicrucian systems, the Theosophical systems, the Freemasonic. They all teach pretty much the same things. They just use different terminology to describe it. And this is where it gets confusing because sometimes the language gets muddled and one doesn't know what the other's talking about. And when you actually look at the teachings of alchemy, of the alchemists, they use coded language. So that makes it even harder to suss out what's going on. But so essentially, what happens with this, what we've done is by looking at all of these different groups, when you find commonalities of what they're describing, you can see there's a kernel of truth to a lot of it. So if you could get verification from, say, 3 different sources on a thing, then it's safe to assume that there's a truth behind it or some kernel of truth behind it. So this is where you have to delve carefully into that kind of stuff. So with that being the case, this is what I've done through the course of time. I've looked at all the different systems, and what I've found is that these various systems, that when they agree on certain topics and they switch up the language, it makes it a little more complex. But to simplify that, what I've done myself is I've tried to stick with one particular system, and I resonate with the Rosicrucian system, with the language that they use to describe things. So what we find is in the Rosicrucian system, and this goes into the theosophy and stuff too. You find, and you mentioned Leadbeater and some of the others before, they teach on this in some of their books. I've read a lot about this. So what happens is we have what they refer to as thought forms. Okay, these thought forms are a type of artificial elemental, they call them. And this has to do with some of these natural hierarchical spirits that have different functions in reality that many of the old alchemists and stuff have regarded as being there. In our modern ways of thinking, they've discounted and discredited all of this stuff and thrown it out. Essentially, what this is nature has intelligence. I think that's inherent. You could see that. That's demonstrable. There's intelligence there. And in nature, there are these spirits, these essences that cause certain functions in this reality that are called elementals. Well, being as we are created in the image of God, we are small c creator beings, and our thought forms can actually begin to manifest and take on a life of their own. So a thought form goes through this process where it steps down through our the spiritual realms into physical manifestation, wherein the thought form can take on more energy and begin to become something of its own, an ensouled being of its own. So this is what you would call an egregore, and they discuss this in the Eastern philosophies too. Sometimes they refer to them as tulpas or tulkus. It's the same type of a thing. It's an artificial elemental that's created from a human thought form that begins to vampirize energy to itself, and then it begins to take on an independent form of its own, an independent type of soul embodiment of its own. Now, it's not necessarily a physical being, but it can attach itself to physical beings and draw power from that. So essentially, what it is it's groupthink. It's the spirit of groupthink. And there are different types of modalities of this and different levels of power of manifestation that come into being with these. Now, one of the highest types of egregores there is what you would call a genius or a genie, a national genie. Or like each country has its own genie or genius spirit that oversees it in the spiritual realms and this kind of thing. So you have all of these embodiments of the collective group think, and people can feed this thing their energy. And this is what I referred to earlier with the mystery schools and the secret society groups. What they've done is they've taken and perverted the initiation process, and they've taken and perverted the spirit and original intent of the mysteries and turned it into this corporate type of a feeding of an egregore spirit. And this is what largely manifests from these secret society groups. So anything that they do, any of their great work that they perform, in essence, is only to empower that egregore. So the egregore is a type of spiritual being, it's a corporate spiritual being that can influence and affect the people that are under its banner and also be steered and directed somewhat by the people under its banner. So it's a complicated subject to really approach, and there's different levels to it, like I said. So I hope that makes sense. And like I said, I like to use the Rosicrucian system. I don't really find much about egregores in many of the systems, though. And the things I do find, sometimes they call them something different. And this is where the confusion comes in. But essentially, what it is it's a thought form that began to draw more energy to itself and draw more people's energy to itself. It's like attracts like. So if there's other people that have like thoughts that center on this same thought form, it draws that energy to itself and it grows in power and it grows in its modalities of manifestation. And a perfect example I could cite for this is the power of the meme. Internet memes are a type of egregore of sorts. They take on a life of their own over the course of time, and it's separate from the creator of it. So the person who came up with the original thought form doesn't necessarily have control of it. It loses control of it. It takes on a type of ensoulment of its own. So I hope this makes sense, and I'm not talking over people's heads here.
Yep. No,
I
it
think
does make sense. Yes, absolutely. Um, there's a guy that I've followed for a little while called Darius J. Wright, and he's actually American born, but he lives here in Australia now and has done for some time. And he teaches people how to he's done out of body traveling. He doesn't call it astral travel because he said he doesn't use his astral body. I think I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's his etheric body, which I want to talk a little bit later about the etheric body. But he speaks about when he is out traveling because he can do it at will. He was leaving his body all the time when he was drifting off to sleep and being conscious of being out and about and traveling in that other realm. And then he learned how to do it at will, like it because it got too much for him and it was starting to fry his central nervous system. So he was able to, through practice, just do it at will. And he now teaches other people. And he talks about thought forms and seeing different scenarios played out in that realm that aren't actually a real thing other than they are thought forms of people's, like people's dreamscapes. Like if you're entering into someone's dreamscape or their thought forms and things like that. So that would also be, I guess, on similar lines to an egregore, that he is actually seeing these thought forms. And the fact that mind over matter and the mind creates, and mind precedes all, as Crow says, and that's one of the Hermetic principles as well. So to think that what we are doing in our mental body is not having an effect on other levels and bringing it down to this to the physical level is probably quite naive. Because yeah, there's not only the physical, but we have, the astral, the etheric. I think the astral is tied to the emotional body, and then you've got the mental body, and so on and so forth. Um, yeah, so touching on the etheric body, because I just started listening to your most recent YouTube um, podcast, or not podcast, but your talk. I only got like partway through earlier today, and you were talking about the etheric body. And funnily enough, the other week I stumbled across a person called Coco Siana Ryder. She's actually Donovan's granddaughter, Donovan, the Scottish singer of the 60s. And she's Sean Ryder's daughter. He's the lead vocalist of Happy Mondays. She has delved right into esoteric studies, and she talks about the astral, sorry, the etheric body, and about it being tethered to the physical body, that it is actually a part of the physical body. It's just like a sub, I think you also said it too, like a sub plane of the physical body. So do you want to touch a little bit on the etheric body and how that ties into all these different studies that you've been doing?
Yeah, I really firmly think that understanding the etheric portion of this reality right now is going to be key in the future here. That this is one of the ways in which we're going to grow spiritually as human beings, like collectively as a race of human beings and also individually, is understanding the etheric portion of this reality. It's of utmost importance right now. And in the cycles of time that we're in, there's going to be more prominence to this etheric portion of the reality. So, this is largely something I've been looking at a lot lately and talking on a lot. And it does relate to how manifestation actually works in reality. This etheric portion of this physical reality we live in is kind of the stepping down layer where it becomes important in order to change things physically here. First, it must occur in the etheric. So, to kind of break this down, like I said, I like to use the Rosicrucian system because this is one of the best descriptive processes we have as to how things come into being. Now, something starts out, I'll use an analogy here. So, first I'll explain and then I'll apply the analogy so you can understand better. So things start actually in the mental plane or the devacanic plane, it's sometimes called in some of the systems. So it would be a thought form. It begins as perhaps a thought form. And most of the time, these thought forms are very fleeting and short-lived, and they'll disappear. And like you were saying, alluding to that person earlier, who can sometimes see these things in their out-of-body experience, oftentimes these thought forms are very fleeting. They'll disappear. Okay, they don't last very long, but sometimes they start to draw energy to themselves by like thoughts or through various different functions that they have, and they become empowered and become an egregore. That's wherein the difference is. A thought form in and of itself usually is very fleeting, does not last long, disappears. But sometimes it becomes an egregore. But at any rate, the point I'm trying to make is it begins in this devacanic plane, or this mental plane, wherein we have our mental body as human beings. And this is the beginning portion of the stepping down from the spiritual into physical manifestation. It starts in the mental plane. The mental plane actually functions as a mirror of the spiritual planes that sit above it. Now, we don't know a lot about the spiritual planes above it, but it steps down through these lower spiritual planes from the mental plane down through the astral plane next, which is sometimes called the the what do they call it, the desire plane. That's how the Rosicrucians refer to it sometimes, the desire plane or the astral plane. And from there it steps down further into the etheric plane, and then this etheric plane is actually a sublayer of the physical reality that we're familiar with. The Rosicrucians describe this as the mental plane. I'll use the term astral plane because it's interchangeable. They use that, or desire plane. Then the etheric, and then the physical. And they call this the dense chemical region that we exist in with our five senses and we experience with our five senses. This is what everybody's familiar with, and what the power structure in this world wants you to believe is the only thing that's reality. But there are spiritual connections between that. Now, this etheric plane is kind of like a subplane of the physical region that we're in, but it's of a finer substance. So therefore, we can't perceive it with our five senses. But we can actually reach into it in a very real physical sense. And we've only just recently, over the course of the past 100 years or so, began to reach into this etheric plane, the very beginning phases of it here, the very beginning closest connections to the dense physical chemical region. And this has to do with the phases of matter as they're taught in your regular science class. So we're all familiar with solid, liquid, and gas. Well, this fourth phase of matter that's only been discovered over the course of the past 100 years or so is called plasma. This is the first step into the etheric layer. Now, according to the Rosicrucians, there are actually 7 phases of matter. And there's 3 more in the etheric layer we haven't seen or discovered yet, or been able to perceive yet. So we're coming up in the cycles of time where we're going to begin to see and experience more of this etheric layer because of the cycles of time that we're going through. Now, this involves the cosmogony of the Rosicrucians in order to explain this better. So like I said, when we're looking at this, we could divide it into these 4 planes: the mental plane, the astral plane, the etheric plane, and the physical plane. Keep it simple that way. So a manifestation of a thing is a stepping down process from the mental plane. Then it steps through the astral plane, where it plays on emotions and feelings and desires. Thus they call it the desire world. And then it steps down from there into the etheric and begins the process of building manifestation in the physical. So this is how manifestation occurs. It starts there, steps down. Okay? Now, what you also need to keep in mind, and this is why I think the etheric is so important right now, is because of the cycles of time that we experience. Now, many of these different cultures and philosophies have discussed cycles of time. They've called them the Vedas in the old Eastern systems and stuff like that. The Rosicrucians talk about various periods. There's 7 different periods of manifestation and 7 different sub-periods. And there's smaller and smaller cycles of time. So what they call periods are the big cycles of time, and then they refer to revolutions as a smaller cycle of time. So these are described as thus, and this is also where there's been a lot of misconstruing and misunderstanding of a lot of occult teachings because of this knowledge that they've passed forward about prior manifestations of the earth, and mankind. So the starting point is what they call Saturn. So we have first the Saturn period, and they describe these as being different periods. And they step down in a descending pattern into the dense physical chemical region that we're in now as the bottommost part. So it steps down 3 cycles to the bottom, and we're at the bottom, and then it goes up 3 more cycles back to the spiritual. So this first cycle, Saturn. The second one is the sun. Third one's the moon, and then there's the earth period. And then past that is what they call the Jupiter period. Beyond Jupiter, there's the Venus period, and then ultimately the Vulcan period. This is how they describe it. And it's kind of like a V shape, but it's circles going down in a V shape. There's diagrams and stuff that show this, and to have an actual physical diagram to look at would make it a little more concise for you. But within each of these periods, these portions of time they call periods, there's also smaller portions of time they call revolutions, and it follows the same pattern. So where they say we exist right now is they say we exist in what's called the Earth period, and we're in the Earth revolution of the Earth period, and we're a little past halfway through that Earth revolution. So we're going to be approaching what's called the Jupiter revolution of the Earth period. And when we get to that point, and this is what many have called the New Age, what's going to happen is we're going to begin to regain some of our spiritual senses that we lost through the involution process from that Saturn period down the chain into physical manifestation in the dense physical. Because this is what they say is the important key to the evolutionary process here in man, is this individuation process. And this is what our ultimate destiny is. So now this was an essential step in our individualized expression and our evolutionary process. So I hope I'm not losing people on this, because this takes many, many years of study to really apprehend really well.
Yeah.
But essentially, what it is how things are supposed to function, okay? How we're supposed to function in this process is we're supposed to be individuated beings. We're supposed to have our own free will, and we're supposed to stay individuals, but still have that connection to source, to God, and not go back to the Godhead as some of these occult teachings teach people, that, all is one, all of that's been misunderstood, right? We have the one, and how we're all these small fractals of God, or we have that divine spark of God. But many of these systems teach that when we die, we are reunited with the Godhead, and we're one with the Godhead. That's not the case. That's not what God's intention was. That's not what the original teachings are. We're supposed to have this individuated existence, but still have that communion and connection to God, to source. And the ultimate manifestation of that happens through this involution process we've gone through, stepping down into this dense physical chemical region wherein we are at the bottommost point, and we've actually acquired this individuation process to its fullest. Now, through the course of these different phases that we've gone through in the Saturn period, Sun period, Moon period, what has happened is through that, and through this individuation process, and this stepping down into the dense physicality here, we've lost some of our spiritual senses along the way. But the plan has always been that we will reincorporate those in a new and better way. And Jesus Christ is the full embodiment of this. His resurrected body is showing us this. This is what's represented by that viewpoint. So we're supposed to have that same kind of thing going on. He's the first fruits. And this is what's happened through the course of time. So when we get to that next level, we'll begin to reacquire our connection back to this etheric layer. Now, in times past, and I've done a lot of broadcasts about this too, in times past, we've had a deeper connection to this etheric layer, and we've been able to sense this etheric layer and interact with it. Well, all of that has changed through the course of time in various cataclysms that mankind has gone through. So in this transformational process, this individuation process, all that's been separated now. We had to be cut off from that in order to achieve the full individuation. But now that we've done that, the next step is to reacquire some of these lost spiritual senses and reacquire this connection back to the etheric portion of this reality. That's the next step. That's what this Jupiter revolution and Jupiter period of the Rosicrucian system is all about. So when we do that, we're going to reacquire our senses and our ability to interact with this etheric portion of reality, and whole new realities really will be open to us again. Things that may have been different for us in the past, in past iterations of mankind, will now become present once again, and we'll still have our full articulated individuated selves, our own free will. This is all part of what has gone on here. So I hope I'm not losing people on
Yeah,
these ways of.
yeah. Oh, well, if you are, I'm sure they can go and do a little bit of their own research and yeah, to expand and broaden their horizons on it. But no, I'm loving this conversation. And what came to mind then was, isn't there a movie called Jupiter Rising?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
See, it's all about that same symbology. And like I said, the Rosicrucian system encapsulates a lot of this very deeply. And
yeah.
having a understanding of how the machinations of this work, you could see that there are some inherent spiritual truths to a lot of this. And this is what our ultimate destiny is supposed to be. We're supposed to be on the spiritual ascendant here. We're supposed to elevate to the next level, get to the next octave in the
Yep.
whole setting here. But there are those powers at play in this world that are trying to deviate from that and create what Rudolf Steiner refers to as the eighth sphere. You see, it's a separate sphere altogether from these other seven that we just spoke of in these cycles of time. So they're trying to create this physical, hyper physical paradigm. And that's where we're at right now. And this is where transhumanism ties into
Yeah.
all of
And
it. I'm
AI
looking,
and
I'm sorry?
AI, artificial
Yes,
intelligence, which is such an oxymoron, but
it is, but like that is most certainly what they're trying to accomplish through
yep.
using this, is building this eighth sphere. Now the Hermeticists called this the world of shells. It's a dead entity. There's
Hmm.
no spirit to it, no soul to it. And essentially, the best way I could describe this to people is what these people in positions of power in this world want to happen, and what they're trying to build is they want people to believe that all phenomena, inclusive of consciousness itself, can be explained away as a physical process, a
Mm.
strictly physical material world process, or the byproduct of a physical process. So they try to express consciousness as nothing more than the byproduct of the electrochemical activity of your brain and brainstem. And if you believe that, then you could buy wholeheartedly into the transhumanist notion of things, that you'd be able to upload your consciousness into a machine, because if that's all it really is the byproduct of the electrochemical activity of the brain and brainstem, then it could be duplicated via algorithm, and you could upload your consciousness into a machine and live on forever in whatever type of form you want. Well, this is what they're trying to build. This whole digital realm is the eighth sphere, as Rudolf Steiner describes it. And it's a dead entity. It's a husk, a lifeless husk, devoid of this spiritual connection back to God. And it's all about dense physicality. It's all about this hyper materialist paradigm that they're trying to establish here. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to take advantage of what they know, these dark occultists who run things in this world, what they know about this etheric sublayer and its importance. So, what they are in fact trying to develop is a synthetic etheric layer, and this is called the digital realm, and this is what AI and all of that stuff is all about. This is
Yep.
why they were pushing metaverse so heavily a
And
few
the
years ago.
Internet of Things.
The Internet of Things, the Internet of Thoughts is part
Hmm.
of that system thereof. This is real stuff. There's white papers talking about it. I've covered them in the past. So you have all of this coming online. Now they've backed away from calling it metaverse, but they're still developing what they call Web 3.0 technologies. And it's about building this digital infrastructure of this world. And essentially, what it's intended to be is a synthetic etheric plane, because this is what the important stepping down process of manifestation takes advantage of, is this etheric portion. So if they build a synthetic form of that, then they could bring about changes in this world that shouldn't be here through that doorway, through that conduit, rather than going through the proper cycles of doing so, coming from the mental plane through the astral plane to the etheric plane, and then into physicality here. So this is what they're trying to bypass by building this. Now, this is a lot of advanced stuff. So, like a lot of people that are still on the 101 level are probably just tuning out right now if they're listening. I don't know much about your audience, how deep they've gone into a lot of these ways of thinking, but this is essentially where I'm at right now.
Yeah.
I'm
Oh,
not
I,
at the,
I like to open up, yeah, so many different doors for people, and it's up to them, like I said, if they want to further their research and learn more about these sorts of things. But as I said, I really like where this is going, and it really resonates with me. It's like what I learnt with the mystery school that I was studying with years ago, talking about the involution and the evolutionary processes and the cycles, the time cycles and the cycles of mankind, and coming down, as you say, coming down through the levels, and we're now at the densest level. We can't really get any denser than where we are. We're pretty much at the end of the road. We've got nowhere else to go but up again into evolution because we're at the bottom of the involutionary period. And I'm sure people will feel that even if they can't intellectualize it or understand it or comprehend it um, in a tangible way. I'm pretty sure people are feeling it anyway. I mean, all you've got to do is look around at the world today and the amount of people that are, and I hate to use the term, but for want of a better word, awakening. There is definitely a spiritual revolution, a spiritual awakening going on. And as you said at the beginning of this podcast, with the synchronicity and the meeting back up with Jason and things like that, I've been also finding a lot of synchronistic things happening in my life and touching base with people from the distant past that are now like I would never have been able to speak to them about spiritual or esoteric type subjects years ago when I knew them. But now we're having these conversations. So to me, it definitely is a sign that we are definitely on that upward path. So that's sort of just simplifying, I guess, a little bit of what you were touching on there.
yeah, and we're supposed to be on the ascendant, and we should be, but there are those that are trying to lock us into the hyperphysical paradigm. That's the whole point here. There are some non-human intelligences, in my view, that are involved in this as well.
Yep.
So this, what they're trying to build, they're trying to build an artificial synthetic version of the earth we're familiar with, a strictly physical paradigm wherein we're separated from God, from source, from the spiritual. They deny all spiritual aspects of things. And like I said, they try to explain away all phenomena as nothing more than some physical cause and effect sequence. So if they could convince enough people of that, then they could effectively build this world of shells or eighth sphere reality that they're attempting to. And this is exactly what the transhumanist notion of things is bringing into existence, except they're using our more modern senses to bring this to fruition. They use technology instead of, say, magic, although it's all the same thing, really, in essence. And
Yep.
this is a lot the old natural sciences and stuff have encapsulated. So there's methods to it. They're combining the old natural sciences and alchemical sciences with some of our new technologies and our new understandings of this dense physical chemical region that we live in, and gaining mastery of that and grasping hold of these ideas of how to manipulate the etheric portion to bring things to fruition here. So this is what's of utmost importance because it's this etheric link that connects us to our spiritual higher selves that we're supposed to be stepping up into. Okay, we're on this process of evolution, and I've never heard anybody other than myself and you just now speaking about involution. I've never heard anybody else talking about that. So it's an important thing to understand. We've gone through this process of involution up until the point of the events at the what they call in the Rosicrucian system the mystery of at Golgotha, which is the advent of Christ and Christ's work on the cross. And at that point now, that's when we hit the bottom layer here in dense physicality, and we could go no further into this individuation process. And then he offered this way forward. So this is what has happened. We have this first fruits of what the Rosicrucians call this Jupiter cycle, that we will be reconnected back to this etheric portion, and we'll have the full abilities we've obtained through the individuation process in physicality, and we'll regain a lot of those lost spiritual senses that we once had in past iterations of man. And you could look back at some of these notions of ancient cultures and stuff like that, advanced cultures like the Atlanteans and the Lemurians, and there were all these different epochs of time that were kind of sub-cycles of the cycles of time in the Rosicrucian system here. And these were prior iterations of Earth, wherein the Earth conditions at those times were much different than they are now. And this is where a lot of people get lost in their ways of thinking. And this is where our modern science gets it wrong in a lot of ways, too. They assume that things how they are now, it's always been this way. That's not the case. Conditions were once different, very different than they are now. In the times of the Atlantean culture, the air was infused with a more watery type of an element to it. So it was much denser. And therefore, they were able to use different modes of technology that we can't use anymore because the conditions aren't the same. So therefore, they had a much easier time, say, levitating things or moving things. And they had those types of technologies. And we found some evidences of this through the course of time, but nobody knows how they operate or why they operate in this way. Well, it's because conditions were different then. And that's why a lot of the things that are said to be passed down from this Atlantean culture in the past to the modern iterations of mankind, they just don't seem to have any merit to them, according to modern ways of thinking. And that's because we make assumptions about what the world was like in the past and what man was like in the past. And they're not always correct. So we have these different descriptions given to us through these various schools of thought from these various people who've brought forward some of this information. And they claim to have maintained lost records of this stuff in some of the secret society groups. And it's interesting when you take a look at some of the teachings about a culture like Atlantis and stuff like that. So it's a fascinating thing, really. But it's all based on the premise that at one time, conditions here were much different than they are now. And that's why a lot of this has to do with this connection back to the etheric layer, in my view. It's because not only were the physical conditions different, but man was more attuned to the etheric portion of reality at that point, rather than the dense physicality, because he hasn't stepped all the way down into dense physicality at that point. He was still going through this involution process. So therefore, that's why things were different, and people, the records and stuff that were passed down from the Atlanteans and the teachings from the Atlanteans talk about things that most people don't resonate with today because it just doesn't make sense to them, and they'll think that's all nonsense.
Yeah.
That's all because of the way our scientific viewpoints have brought us in this dense physical form that we're in now. We can't perceive of it or conceive of what it was like because conditions were so different. But anyway, yeah, I
Yeah.
went on a little side tangent there.
Yeah, no,
Sorry.
that's fine. That's fine. Yeah, because I have read and heard along the lines that before we got to where we are now in our dense physical bodies, that we were um in our etheric bodies, and it still felt very physical. And again, going back to Darius J. Wright, the fella that does the and teaches people how to at will do their, out of body traveling. He said when he's in that state, it feels as physical, if not more physical and more real than what it is in so-called normal waking life. Um, so that's really interesting too. Yeah, sort of tying in a little bit with what you were saying. So I just want to shift gears a little bit, but it sort of ties into what we were talking about anyway. But the nature of this realm and also the the lost history and the fact that I don't know whether you've looked into it or not, but just in the last recent probably year or so, I've started to look a little bit into the Tartaria type research that people are doing and the old world buildings, the world fairs, the technologies that these people had. And there's no denying that something went on and that history has been changed because, according to the mainstream narrative, Australia's only, what, two, 200 and something years old, nearly, so probably, yeah, 250 or something years old when Captain Cook came and discovered Australia. And yet we've got buildings here, even in my local city, which is Brisbane City, and then you've got Melbourne, Perth, Adelaide, all the capital cities around. And even in some of the smaller country towns, you've got these buildings that there is no way that convicts or even free settlers, little more than a couple of hundred or 250 odd years ago, would have been able to erect. And there's no record of them being built. They always talk about them being founded. So, what are your thoughts on all this and the hidden history? Do you think that the powers that should not be have definitely hidden a lot of technology and a lot of things from us with regards to history?
Well, history is a big convoluted mess, really. The victor writes the history. So we have to keep that in mind. But I have actually dug into the whole Tartaria thing, and honestly, in my view, it doesn't have legs when you actually get it down to the brass tacks of what they try to claim is Tartaria. Now, I think the ideas are inherently there, and this is pointing back to much older periods of time. Like I said, the Atlantean cultures and things like that, where we're looking at that stuff. And yeah, we have these different processes where mankind is always built on top of older structures or foundations. This is something that's gone on. And there have been very many natural disasters and cataclysmic events throughout the course of the world through various times. And yes, the buildings themselves are not really proof that there was this vast Tartarian empire that once ruled the world. And this is something that I've taken umbrage with because I have looked at it. And you know where this comes from? The whole idea that the whole notion of Tartaria comes from. I looked at this years ago when it first emerged on the scene. It comes from one declassified CIA document where they mentioned the the culture of Tartary in context with the Soviet Union. How when the Soviet Empire was expanding, what they did is they would go through and they wanted to present themselves as being the most positive towards these different cultural groups that were across this area that was known as Tartary at the time. So a lot of that culture, they were actually Muslim. So what the Soviets did is they went through and the Soviets, when they decided they were taken over, they didn't want religion to be in place of the state or anything like that. So what they did is they went and they started tearing down the mosques and they started treating the people of the area of Tartary very badly, but they wanted to whitewash that. So that's what they did. They whitewashed that to try to present themselves as being beneficent to these people and nice to these people and stuff like that. But they wanted to eliminate Islam from the picture. So in this document, it talks about exactly that they went back and they whitewashed what they'd done because they treated these people very poorly, but they wanted to present themselves in the main historical narrative as being beneficent toward these people. So that's where this comes from in the mention of Tartary. So it wasn't that they went through and they covered up this entire vast civilization. That's not what it was at all. These were disparate people groups in the region that was known on the maps at that time as the Greater Tartary. And this is where the whole notion of Tartaria came about. And people took some different ideas from some other things and mixed it together with that. And it got grossly misconstrued. And they talked about mud floods happening and occurring in the 1800s, the mid 1800s. This stuff never happened. I mean, yeah, there were regional floods, but there wasn't this vast mud flood at that time that buried this civilization. And it wasn't this highly advanced civilization of giants and stuff like this. They had all of this stuff attached to this. And a lot of it harkens back to the archetypes. And this is how I was able to actually see through a lot of this because it harkens back to mythology and it harkens back to much older events. It harkens back to the Titanomachy in the old Greek culture, talking about the battle between the Titans and the Olympians who took over. It harkens on that archetype, and it uses all of these different motifs and archetypes in this story about Tartaria. And there was really no such empire. It wasn't a worldwide empire. Now, I'm not saying there weren't maybe some buildings or something that were destroyed and cover ups that have gone on of individual things, but there's no evidence that there was this vast worldwide culture, this technologically advanced culture called Tartaria. This is where they, in my view, what's happened is somebody muddied the waters in trying to bury the connection back to some of these older civilizations that did exist by throwing something like this out there, muddying the waters with it, and getting a lot of people looking down that rabbit hole. And it's an endless cul-de-sac that'll keep you spinning in circles over and over. And a lot of it stems from the emergence of this one declassified CIA document. I have it in my files here, actually, somewhere in my digital archive. But that's what has happened, and they took the popularity of the idea of the mud fossil. Do you remember the whole mud fossil thing?
Yeah, the
Roger.
mud floods,
No, mud
mud
fossils. This is
fossils.
something that predates the whole mud flood narrative.
Oh, okay, yep,
So they took that idea, which was actually getting a little bit of traction at the time, and they incorporated it into this story with the whole mud flood scenario, and they connect all of these other disparate things to it and claim that there's a vast cover up. But when you actually follow the evidence to where it leads, there's nothing there. And that's the problem I have with it. I'm not saying there weren't advanced civilizations in the past. I most certainly think they were, but I don't think they occurred in the mid to late 1800s, and that it was all covered up and wiped out by mud floods and various things. And then the powers that be went in and hid away their technologies and stuff like that. I don't think that's what happened or what occurred. I think the Tartaria thing's a red herring, if you want my honest opinion about it, to get
yep,
people on the trail.
yep,
And some of the ideas they present in it may have some merit to them, but it's probably from a much older culture than that. So they're trying to draw people's attention to the wrong point in the timeline to look for that stuff.
yep. Yeah, but you're right that yeah, history is very convoluted and it's definitely not what yeah, what we've been led to believe, no matter where you sit on the fence with this or one side or the other or what you're yeah, looking at. But I'm just interested, as I say, with the buildings that we see around in relatively um new, like civilizations like Australia, and how these buildings got built and things like that. So I'm still looking into that sort of thing. But anyway, but no, I tend to agree that I don't think there was this one civilization throughout the whole world. Um, but there's definitely yeah, there's been a lot of hidden history, put it that way, in
Yeah.
my view anyway. Yeah,
And
yeah,
a lot of I've looked at this angle of it too, like things with the Gothic cathedrals and stuff like that. They seem to have like an energetic resonance to them.
yeah,
Well, a lot of I think stems back to what I was saying earlier about going back and calling what they call the Atlantean civilization or something like that. That's probably a catch-all phrase. There were probably very many different disparate civilization groups or something that had technological advances and stuff. But those types of buildings, what they were modeled after, probably don't function in the way that they once did.
mm,
You have people talking about how it's supposedly creating this energy grid or something like that. And a lot of this probably has to do with earth changes through these various cycles of time that I spoke of, where conditions were different in the Atlantean period. So maybe like the ley lines that
well, you're
we've
frozen.
come to know them
Oh,
today were different at that point. And they, oh, am
no,
I back?
yeah, you're back.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Okay,
heard you say
good.
the ley lines.
Right. Maybe like the ley lines or something functioned differently then. They were more energized and just building these structures, they were able to tap into that. Whereas today it doesn't function the same. But
Yep,
we still have this architecture, like these Gothic architecture and stuff like that, and these buildings that may have at one time served that function from an older culture when conditions were different here, or are modeled after what that culture built that worked for them, but they don't work the same today. You see, and this is where you get a lot of people endlessly arguing about this stuff and saying that this is like an energy generator or something like that, a giant battery. Maybe it was at one time, but it doesn't function that way now. And a
Hmm.
lot of this has to do with the separation of the time and the cycles of time. So if you're trying to pull this stuff forward and say that this was during the mid to late 1800 time period that this stuff was actually still functional and operational, you're misleading people. And I think that's what's been going on with this is it's misdirecting people from understanding that, hey, maybe there is something to this, but it's probably far older than you think, and it may not function in the same way now because conditions aren't right now.
Yep.
But we are stepping into this time where we're going to have this reconnection with the etheric portion, and maybe something functional will come about in that way by looking at some of this stuff. So it's important that we look at it and keep an open mind about it, but at the same time, I don't want anybody to be misled about things.
Yep.
And that's why I've taken umbrage with the whole Tartaria narrative, because there's nothing to it. So anybody who's skeptical, in the least bit skeptical about it, is going to look at the ideas they're talking about with like these buildings and stuff as energy generators or batteries and stuff like that, or and they connect it back to this Tartaria narrative, and they go look at the Tartaria narrative, and they're like, it's nonsense. So they throw out the baby with the bathwater. I don't like doing that. The ideas in and of themselves have merit, but I think they're looking in the wrong place. This is how disinformation and misinformation works. Give them 90% good information and throw in 10% crap, and then they throw the whole thing out.
Yep.
And that's what happened here. It's kind of poisoned the narrative with all of this.
Yep. Yep. No, absolutely. Um, all right. Well, I think we've just about covered most of what I had on the list to cover today. So if you want, was there anything else you wanted to touch on while we're here? I think we've still got a little bit of time. Um,
Well, like I said, I think the important thing is understanding this etheric portion and
yeah,
understanding we're going to have a greater connection to that in upcoming times here. So that's that's one of the main things I've been focusing heavily on right now.
yeah.
Understand this etheric portion of reality. Um, we could talk about maybe the human body and the various vehicles of operation we have through these
Yeah,
various planes.
actually, yes. Yeah, because I've got this book here that I'm just looking at the moment called The Subtle Body. And I haven't read it. I've just flicked through and picked out bits and pieces. But with regards to the energetic bodies and the different bodies within the physical realm, there's obviously, things that we can't see, but we know are there, like the chakra systems, the auric field. We touched on before about the mental body, physical body, emotional body, that sort of stuff. So, is that what you were alluding to, like the different energetic bodies within the physical body?
Yeah, I mean we and this is the thing, and understanding this I think is critical in upcoming days, especially when you begin to look at some of the information that's come out in recent years about this. So here's how the Rosicrucians describe it. We have what they call the mental body, we have the astral body, we have the etheric body, and we have this dense physical body that we're familiar with. So we have these four vehicles of operation. Now, directly attached to the physical body is the etheric body, and it's very tightly connected to the physical body. Now, much more loosely attached is the astral body to the etheric body, and then the mental body to the astral body. And we could see this as the auric field and this kind of thing, or at least people that claim to be clairvoyant can see it, or some people have the ability to see auras and this kind of thing. And these bodies are interconnected. And our physical body, while we're conscious here, while we're physically awake and conscious, our etheric body and everything stays within, connected. The etheric body stays with us all the time. Now, when we go to sleep, it is said what happens under normal circumstances is your physical body and your etheric body stay connected and lay in the bed, and your astral and mental body leave and go wander. And they're connected by this silver cord. And that's what a lot of the traditions have said and what they claim. So when you're sleeping, your astral body wanders, and most of the time we don't have memory of any of that because it's not imprinting into the brain. This is one of the important precepts here. This physical body is kind of a receiver, especially the brain. The our consciousness is imprinted into the brain from these outside spiritual worlds. This is where it goes opposite or contrary to what we're taught in mainstream science. So these people in positions of power today, they want us to think that consciousness could be explained away as the physical byproduct of the electrochemical activity of the brain and brainstem. Nothing could be further from the truth. It comes from outside. I like to use the analogy of a radio as a way to describe this. So the brain's like the receiver, the radio unit that we have. You could tune it to the channel and you get the channel. Whereas the signal is the important part. This is the message coming from the mental plane down into and imprinting into the physical vehicle here. So this is the one of the important precepts. And the way that it does this is through the astral and then through the etheric. So this etheric connection is where the importance lies right now, especially for us in the cycles of time we're coming on. So when we dream at night or when we're asleep at night, the astral and the mental body, they wander into the astral plane or the astral realm and they experience different things there. And sometimes if we wake up suddenly or something, we could remember a little bit of our dreams. And that's because we've awoken suddenly, so then it imprints very quickly on the brain. And sometimes you could remember it if you decide to write it down or something like that.
I
Otherwise,
remember
it
my dreams every
sleeps up.
morning. I,
Do
I
you?
I always remember my dreams, and I often have. Sorry to throw you off here, but I
No, that's
often
fine.
have lucid dreams as well. And once I realize I'm dreaming, I can manipulate the dream.
Right.
Yep.
And that's the cool thing because that means like you're having some awareness, conscious awareness in this astral plane. And not everybody has that. It has that connection because most people in standard culture today are so disconnected from anything spiritual that they have no perception of that whatsoever. So they don't know what goes on like during these different times. And sometimes you'll remember a dream, sometimes you won't. And sometimes it's not really a dream of anything fantastic or anything like that, but it does sometimes imprint with you, especially if you awaken suddenly or something like that. But if you've ever had that type of a dream where you were woken up in the middle of a dream and then you remembered the dream on conscious waking, but whatever woke you up or whatever drew your attention, and then you immediately forgot the dream. I've had that happen to me. So, like, this kind of thing happens, and that's the explanation as to why, because it doesn't imprint on the physical brain because it happened in the astral form. But we don't lose that astral memory in that regard. So it does kind of incorporate into our overall mental body, our individuated self, the I am within man, which is what empowers us. They would call it the ego in some of the systems. So we have this ego, the individuated self, which operates from the mental plane in these various bodies. And it's only when we're in waking consciousness here that it all kind of commingles together at that point. But we are separated from some of the spiritual senses that we once had. So this is the whole idea based upon that. We have these four different vehicles of operation. And what you were described with this gentleman who says he doesn't astrally project, his etheric body leaves. This is something that's actually touched upon in various magical systems, most notably things that are known as witchcraft by some of the old Hermetic sciences. It's the ability to separate your etheric body from your physical body, and that's not something most people can do naturally. It's not a normal thing, normal function. That only happens in some people for whatever reason, where the etheric body is loosened from the physical body. That doesn't normally happen.
Yeah,
But
he
it is
says
said,
he slows his heart rate right down almost. If someone was to come in, they may even think that he's dead. He said it's like a little mini death every time he does it. It does feel
right?
like the dying process.
And it probably does have a deleterious effect on his physical form too, though, every time he does it, whether he's aware of that or not. But what I'm getting to here is it is said in some of the traditions of magic I've looked at, where a witch, particularly, they referred to this in some of the Hermetic systems as a form of witchcraft, where they could separate their etheric form from their physical form and travel with that. And they could actually physically manifest in a physical body temporarily with their etheric form in this way. And this is recorded in a lot of different traditions, but it does take a toll on a body. But this has to do with this notion of the loosening of the etheric form. And this is also something that's important because I think there's a lot of that going on with things that are being done right now with the medical technology, where they're affecting people in certain ways with these various physical things, procedures that they're doing to people. And are you familiar with a podcast called The Telepathy Tapes? Have you listened to that at all?
No, I'll write that down.
Listen to the Telepathy Tapes, and I think you'll know where I'm going with this.
Yep.
Okay. This is something that somebody mentioned to me a couple years ago now. It's been out for like 2 years, if I'm not mistaken. The whole premise of the show is, especially the first season, I haven't followed past the first season, but the first season of the show, what she did, the creator of the show, is she was talking to families of autistic children, and the autistic children had actually expressed that they left their bodies and were able to meet at a certain place with other autistic people.
I've heard this. Oh, maybe you spoke about this on one of the Crow shows. That might be where I
I, I
heard it.
I didn't speak about it on a Crow show, but I did a podcast episode about this because I listened to the telepathy tapes and I found it fascinating, like what she was saying. So these autistic kids who were largely like nonverbal, they were able to communicate through the use of like a computer device and this kind of thing. And they would express that they would meet their friends on the hill. And it turns out like she talked to different families from different areas of the country, and some of these kids knew each other from on the hill. So they were like leaving their physical bodies and meeting in this place. So this really shot up a red flag for me because I got to thinking about this because I've done a lot of extensive work on autism. I'm personally affected by autism in a great way. I've got children with autism. So the thing that really gets me is these claims that these autistic nonverbal children were able to actually leave their bodies and meet with these other children of the same sort in this one place, and they describe the place all the same, all these different people. And so it's a fascinating podcast to listen to. It's called The Telepathy Tapes. Listen to season 1. And she talks about this stuff. And essentially what this really brought to mind with me is this has everything to do with the loosening of the etheric body. Because within the human body, the vehicles that we have, these 4 vehicles of expression, the mental body, the astral body, the etheric body, and the physical body, we have right here at what they call the root of the nose, a lot of people will call it the pineal gland, but there are correspondences in these other bodies that equate to that pineal gland. So what happened, in my view, my estimation, is this spot. Now, clairvoyants will say it's a black spot that you could see there, right? This spot they've described as what they call the Holy of Holies. This is the individuated self, the separated, individuated self of mankind. The Holy of Holies, it's inviolable, impenetrable, and this is where the seat of the soul rests, okay? So this is what they've claimed in the past in many of these systems that I've looked at. And in the human being, these are all aligned one-to-one in these various vehicles that we have. Now, in some animals, like for instance the horse, and I've seen this described before, the horse's Holy of Holies, if you want to call it that, the black dot, clairvoyants see it sits just above the head. And they explain that this is why animals seem to have these extra senses that we don't. They could maybe perceive spiritual things that we don't perceive.
I
Well,
know
in
cats
my
definitely do.
right now, the ones that they say are closest in this alignment with mankind are dogs. They say dogs are most closely aligned in that way, but different animals, their that spot is not aligned perfectly with their physical body. So therefore, that's why they say animals have different senses than human beings and can sense spiritual things better than human beings. Well, what it seems to me has happened is they've somehow loosened or knocked loose this holy of holies within this particular population of people. So it's misaligned so that this spot is not aligned perfectly with the physical pineal gland. And this loosens the etheric body. And therefore, if the etheric body is looser, the astral body is also looser. And perhaps they can disconnect in that way. And if you've talked about this gentleman who's able to disconnect his etheric form in that way, it has to do with that as well. So this inviolable seat of consciousness isn't necessarily resting in the place where it should be in many of these people. And this is something they've talked about in some of these occult fraternities and stuff in the past, as far as why they perform these traumatic initiation rituals, because it's intended to knock loose the etheric form in that way. It's to knock loose this seat of the soul so that you can have those types of out of body experiences and stuff like that. Well, it seems to me there's an entire subpopulation of extremely affected autistic people that have that ability. And I think this is one of the secret things that's going on as far as they're attempting to engineer these various conditions in certain ways. And it's really fascinating. So when you get a chance, listen to the telepathy tapes, and
Yeah, I
you'll be
will. Yep.
so
Yes.
I wanted to touch upon that because I think this autism epidemic we're seeing today has everything to do with that on the darker side of things. And most people won't connect the dots with that because this touches upon the spiritual component that most people aren't comfortable talking about. And we
Yes.
see more and more of this. And I've actually gone through and I've made the case in two books now. In my view, the autism epidemic is an engineered condition that's been purposely steered and directed in certain ways
Yes.
by the various substances and or technologies and things like that. So
Yeah,
it's definitely
absolutely.
out there.
Yeah, because I mean, when I was growing up, I mean, I'm mid 60s born, so going through school was like 70s into the early 80s. And I don't ever remember anyone being autistic or having any sort of learning difficulties or ADHD or any of these things that a lot of the young people coming up through now are dealing with. So it's definitely been engineered. It's definitely, in my view, the things that are going into these little bodies in the way of the little pinpricks and the food, the preservatives, the metals, all that sort of
The
stuff.
electromagnetic radiation.
Yeah,
It's a synergistic network of different things that are bringing this about. But in my view, like I said, I really suspect it's engineered, and I've made a pretty good case that that seems to be what's going on. Now, this adds a different component to that that I haven't really touched upon much as far as in my books or anything like that. But the whole notion that was laid down by the telepathy tapes really set a bell off in my mind because I knew immediately this is what's going on. So they're trying to hijack this whole process of this reconnection to the etheric field,
yep,
essentially. So and
yes,
like I said, they're trying to build this digital sublayer as a synthetic version of that. And have you noticed one thing in particular with an autistic population? They have an affinity towards technology,
yes,
computers, and stuff like that. It's not by accident. It really
yep,
isn't.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. And also it brought to mind too when you were talking about that with the horrific things that go on in some of these secret society initiations and things and the SRA that goes on, and the victims end up with what used to be called multiple personality disorders. Now I think it's called dissociative, what is it?
Dissociative identity disorder.
DID, yeah. Yes.
D.
So, and I think that's also part of all this as well.
Oh, I
Um,
suspect that too. Yeah, and Alzheimer's, everything across the board. It's all part and parcel of the same thing.
yep,
It's just what's the people is manifesting what symptoms as a an effect of this engineering that's going on. And
yep,
it's got a lot of factors to it. Like I said, it's a synergistic network of different things working together in certain ways that affect some people and not others, and affect some people in certain ways and not others. That's why autism is a spectrum disorder, because not everybody is exactly the same. There's differences from individual to individual, and a lot of these different mental illnesses and stuff that are emerging too as being normal stuff now in the modern era that didn't exist in the past is not all part and parcel of this same thing going on. It's a type of experimentation going on. And it all relates to transhumanism. That's my whole point. That's the premise that I've made in the books that I've written about this, and what I'm talking about with it. It all has to do with the advent of transhumanism. And I'm maybe about 10 years younger than you. I was born in the mid 70s, grew up, went to school in the 80s. It's nothing like it is now. It was
mm,
nothing like maybe you had one special ed kid or something in the school. Like I remember we had maybe three kids in the entire school when I was growing up, and they weren't all there at the same time either. Like they come and go, and that was it. They had their own special classroom, and there were only like three of them or something. One teacher for three of them, and it wasn't labeled autism or anything like that. I mean, they had more severe deficits than that. But it wasn't a normal thing. There was no ADHD. There was none of that stuff going on.
mm,
It was just, and now see people like us that are a little older and have seen the world pre-internet days and before all the cell technology and all of these different things that they've unleashed on us. We know better, and the newer generations, they don't know better because it's all they've ever known. So they
yep,
think that this is normal. And it's not. It's been engineered into humanity, into society for a reason by these controllers of this place. And a lot of it has to do with separating us from our spiritual identity and our spiritual connection and our destiny to achieve that next level. And it's all about trapping us in the hyper physical paradigm.
yep,
That's my
yep, absolutely. So, just to round things off, and ending on a positive note, what things do you do to keep your vibration raised? To what sort of spiritual practices and or physical things that you may do that help you to stay grounded, to stay focused, and to help you in your trajectory back up the ladder, so to speak.
prayer, service to others, and I'm an avid reader. I read and read and read. I've got literally thousands upon thousands of digital documents. My wife would kill me if I had all physical books. I just don't have them. I started collecting some a while ago, but she's like, "No, you can't do that. We don't have the room for that." So, I'm an avid reader. Like I read a lot, and I've
Yep,
read many of the books you talked about in the beginning. There, stuff by Leadbeater and Alice Bailey, and all of that stuff, and numerous others from all the various different occult fraternities and stuff like that. I read it all, and I take it all into consideration, and I use it as an analysis tool from these different systems, one to the other, to try to find commonalities. And where the commonalities lie in at least three different places is where you could find the kernel of truth to what's being said there. Now, you
yep,
do find a lot of crap and nonsense in that stuff too, but there are a lot of valuable truths to be found in there, a lot of good information. And that's what makes it a mixed bag. And this is where a lot of people get it wrong because they look at it, they see the bad stuff that's tangled up with it, and they throw it all out and discount it all. But there's a lot of valuable information that can be found, a lot of better understanding for the machinations of how the world really works.
yep,
Because we're lied to about that.
yep.
The
And
world doesn't work how you think it does. Jordan Maxwell once said that. I remember.
Exactly. And I think that's why they have done that too, because they want people to throw the baby out with the bathwater and they don't want people to find that little nugget of truth. So that's why the waters are muddied and things like that. So, but yeah, no, definitely reading. Like I've got let me think, I've got one, two, three, four, five, six bookcases in my house and I've still got books stacked up and on coffee tables and things. So I I've got a few things online, but I tend to be a little bit like what Crow talks about, like the modern day book burning and things can be changed digitally as well. So I really love to have hard copies of books, but again, you have to be discerning in what you've got, and also getting little nuggets in some of the old secondhand bookstores. Like I could spend a whole day in a secondhand bookstore, and some of the little things I've found. I think I found the whole, what is it, the Holy Grail? Um, oh, it was about the Knights Templar. I can't remember the title of the book. It's a big, thick book. Yeah, I came across that. I came across this one a little while ago too. Um, the secrets of symbols, secrets of signs and symbols and things like that. So yeah, but I think yeah, also eating healthy, prayer, meditation, staying grounded, drinking pure water, not tap water and that sort of thing. So there are definitely ways that we can, keep as healthy and as focused as possible. But in the long run, I think God wins anyway. I think, the dark agenda, the dark forces, and the so-called people that are running the show at the moment, and people call them elites and the ruling class, but I just call them parasites now because I don't want to keep reiterating that because what you say you can bring about. So as far as I'm concerned, they're not in charge. They think they are, but they're not really. So yeah. So have you got any
And
closing comments before we wind up?
well, that's where I have tremendous hope because the more of us that realize that they think they're in charge, there's more of us than there are them. We
Mm-hmm.
outnumber them millions to one. So the game is over. The gig is up. And now with the Epstein files and stuff out there in the open and the masses actually reasonably thinking about this stuff that they wouldn't have touched with a 10-foot pole just a couple short months ago
Mm-hmm.
and being considering, hey, maybe these conspiracy people weren't so crazy after all talking about this. That gives me a lot of hope because the gig is up, the party's over for these people, and I think they know it, and they're in the throes of panicking about it. They're throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks now. They're
Yeah.
talking about the alien files, and now we've gone to war with Iran out of nowhere, and like they're trying to kick off the Armageddon, and they've openly said that in
Mm-hmm.
military meetings and stuff like that. They're trying to kick off Armageddon. They're trying to provoke Armageddon,
Yep.
and it's really like they're throwing everything at the wall at this point. They're in panic mode
Yep.
because they know the
Absolutely.
is not going to win, and that's wherein I find the ultimate hope. So I don't think we could end on a better note than that. In
Yep.
the end,
Absolutely. Yep. We've got this. We do. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks so much, Wayne, for joining me today on Caravan of Consciousness. So, again, for folks that want to look into more of your research and get your books, where can they find you?
it's been a pleasure, and we'll have to do this again soon. They could find me at www.alchemicaltechrevolution.com. Thanks again. Always appreciate it.
Yep, that's great. Thank you so much. All right, people. Thanks for your time today and your attention. I'm not sure what date I'll be getting this up in the next day or so, maybe even later today. Just for the record, so people know we're recording this. I have to check my phone. It's Friday, the 6th of March here, and I believe you're back in time in the 5th of.
That's
Um,
right. I'm still the 5th of March. It's about 11 p.m. here right now.
yeah,
So
yeah.
behind you in the times, you're in the future.
Yes, yes. I'm a time traveler. All right, again. Thanks again, Wayne, for that. And all right, ciao, everybody, and I'll see you next time. Just hang in there, Wayne.